just because I do that. And so we're going to record this session on club election best practices. My name is Chris Zabriskie. I'm the district trainer. We have a modest but powerful and knowledgeable audience here in person. And as a resource, this is going to be a good future resource for everybody going forward. Like I said, we're recording this. If anybody wants to, doesn't consent to be fully recorded, then you can limit your participation, and we'll get on with the session. So opening discussion, and I'm glad I do have a little bit of an audience because there's a discussion portion. So why is it important that club leaders be elected? So and you can unmute and speak, and or raise your hand if you wanted to be identified. It's not just a rhetorical question here. I know somebody's gonna help me out here.
I think it's important for club leaders to be elected so they have the support of the club. As we know, being a volunteer leader in any organization, you need to have the support of the people that you're working with. And so I think by having your club members have a voice in the process, they are more likely, even if maybe that person wasn't their first choice, to still support them and recognize them as the leader of the organization. So I think just kind of like club buy-in for a brief term is why it's probably most important.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have something I want to add to that? That's exactly where I was going for. It's, other than it being a democratic organization, people want to have a voice, but really having the legitimacy of having the support of the organization and the people that you're going to be leading. Because nothing's worse than you see it in third world countries sometimes, or dictatorships, where there's a leader and he doesn't have the support of the people because they didn't put him there. And by going through the process, your president and your board and your officers will have that legitimacy that they were selected. So then they can go forward. There is a process for having a club leader. We've got some trivia here, so I'm not going to put up a poll or anything like that. But I'll just have people call out or raise hands or answer in the chat if you want. When does a club normally elect president? Now, we're talking specifically about presidents here. When do you think? Or put something in the chat here to let me know. I'll actually put my chat box up, or you can just let me know. When do you think is a good time or the right time? 6 months prior. Okay, that is a good, and it's kind of in line with something. Anybody else want to say? Is that 6 months prior to becoming president, or 6 months prior to becoming a president-elect?
I was going to comment on how many, some clubs do have more than one person lined up. There's president-elect, and then sometimes some clubs have an even deeper bench than that. So it kind of depends.
We're going to get to that. Yes, actually, it doesn't. And the next question here, is it a requirement or is it a suggestion? There actually is. It's a requirement, and it's more than 6 months. And I'm going to go through a couple documents here, governance documents during the course that regulate our clubs. And I think that's a topic for a whole different training session. It's actually one I've done before on governance, club governance, and the rules that govern you. But this is what the standard club constitution says. And the standard club constitution is something that, unless it gives you that wiggle room, that clubs have to do. And these are kind of the rules. Now, if the club doesn't do it, chances are you're not going to lose your charter or be put in jail or anything like that. But it says the president nominee shall be elected as provided in the bylaws at least 18 months, but not more than 2 years before the day of taking office as president. So 6 months prior to starting their year as president-elect. And it's not necessarily very well understood, the process. And I think a lot of clubs do this, but a lot of clubs don't. And when you look at the clubs that are listed in our district, there are about 32 clubs out of 60 some odd that have president-elects listed. So that means those president-elects were probably elected last year, most of them. which would have been approximately, assuming that was before January 1st, 18 months prior to the July 1st start, in line with what they were supposed to do. And so when a president is elected to a Rotary Club, it's really for a 3-year term. That 3-year term does start 6 months, like Ashley said, 6 months after the, at least 6 months after. So on July 1st, that person starts as the president-elect, then serves a year as president, then serves a year as past president. All 3 of those years are normally considered board positions, officer positions in the club. So, so really, and now we're not. I didn't highlight the section about the club officers, but club officers are normally elected at least 6 months prior. And again, it's the same timeline here. So between 6 months and 12 months prior. So in the July 1st through the December 31st period, there ought to be an election going on to choose the cadre of officers that will take office the following July 1st. And, you know, as we talked about, the president-elect who will become president was actually elected the previous year. So I know I'm kind of talking a lot of time here, and I don't really have a lot of diagram other than the text on the chart. Is that clear to everybody? If it is, just give me a thumbs up or say clear in the chat. Some sort of reaction if I'm not confusing anybody. Does anyone have a question?
I really apologize, Chris. Is there a way to turn off my phone? Because I closed it, but it's kind of, maybe I'm at the meeting,
You're
the one
fine.
without my face.
Which one? Oh, the iPhone 3 you want to take out of the meeting?
Yeah, the phone, yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Yep, I can remove you.
Thank you so much. I didn't do it right. Oh,
Nope.
okay.
You're out. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So anyway, so that's what the standard club constitution says. So there is a timeline. We don't have any Rotaractors here. It's not the same for Rotaract. It's a little bit more loose with the Rotaract. And the Rotaract does have its own standard club constitution, but the guidance is just that elections are held annually. So compatible with local customs and procedures. So there's a lot of wiggle room in that. Some more trivia. Who may be nominated as club president? So if you know some of the criteria for a member being nominated as club president, you can type in the chat, or somebody want to raise their hand. Things might include how long they've been in Rotary. Let's go to the standard club constitution. It actually, yep, any member of good standing. You know, and ultimately, as Dolores says, technically she's right, because what you'll see is there are a lot of caveats after the highlighted segment in here, and she gets a lot of say-so in there. But member of the club for at least 1 year before being nominated. So there is a timeline on there. And attend the president-elect's training seminar and the training assembly. Now that's my foot stomper about attending PETS. But yes, there is the unless the governor determines that less than a full year satisfied the requirement, and then after that second line, unless excused by the governor-elect. So there's some wiggle room in there. And it's not onerous. It's not completely onerous to say you need to be a Rotarian or a member of the club for a year before being elected to be the president, because it's kind of logical. If you're a club president before serving with the club for a year, you're not going to have the track record or the experience really needed to do a good job to do service. And you know, if there are special circumstances that warrant it, then it's up to the governor to make that exception. There's some more text in there, and the actually other text that I should point out is if the president-elect is not able to attend, they should send a substitute. And if that doesn't happen, the current president shall continue to serve until election of a successor who has attended president-elect training seminar and training assembly, or training deemed sufficient by the governor-elect. So again, more wiggle room given to the governor-elect. One more trivia question. Who does the nominating? So who nominates the club president and the officers? And want to take a guess at this?
Club members.
Okay. Club members, yep. Nominating committee, I see there, club members are nominating committee, and that's all right. And it really, but the answer that I have is it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on yet another governance document, but this is the recommended bylaws, or the recommended bylaws are something that Rotary issues to clubs. The clubs then adopt their own bylaws. And so every club should have their own set of bylaws. And in their bylaws, they are to define a process for electing their club officers and the president. And so some clubs use a nominating committee. Some will take membership suggestions from the floor. And from the recommended bylaws, you see there are some blanks in here. And so wherever there are blanks in the recommended bylaws, there's discretion for the clubs to go their own way. Now, I have a couple examples that I'm going to share in the next few slides, but these are part of the recommendation. So, 1 month before elections, so there's a timeline for when nominees should be made. My club, and we're going to look at my club's bylaws here in a second. Members nominate candidates for president, vice president, blah, blah, blah. Nominations may be presented by a nominating committee, by members from the floor, or both. And so really, that could be written just like that. You can adopt the recommended bylaws pretty much as they are, and give yourself that latitude. Some clubs will always use a nominating committee. Some clubs will use, just take members from the floor. Some may have lots of different processes. So I got an email, and I apologize, I didn't write down the gentleman's name, but I'd reached out to one of the clubs that had a club administrator, and I figured that's a good person to know. And I got an excerpt from the Rotary Club of Gaithersburg. And this is the way the Rotary Club of Gaithersburg, as bylaws, address this. So at a regular meeting in December, so now there's actually a time line, the nominating shall propose candidates. So there's that process for this club. And there's also any number of other nominations may be made from members of the floor. So there's lots of wiggle rooms. There's a process placed on a ballot, voted at that meeting, and then the 3 candidates securing the highest number of votes shall be declared elected to a term of 3 years. The 3 candidates commencing on July 1st of the following year. So, and 3 candidates. Anyway, that's there. Miss Lena, did you want to say something? Your mic's unmuted.
No, I already fixed the problem. I had this echo and long story, but I'm good.
Okay,
Sorry
good.
about all of that.
One interesting thing that I wasn't familiar with any clubs doing is they have a confirmation process here about the board of directors will meet in January to confirm the members that are elected. And the president-elect, the vice president shall be selected from the existing board members who will assume the position of president-elect should the current president-elect not be able to fulfill his or her obligation. So that's actually a really nice thing, and my club doesn't have that necessarily. That we have a leadership crisis if we have somebody drop out. But that's just an interesting little bit of text there. And this is something Section 3 and Section 4 is a note here that's worth talking about. So it talks about filling vacancies. So after the election happened, if you need to fill a vacancy, it's fairly typical to have a vacancy be filled by the board of directors for that board. So if it's the current board that has a vacancy on it, the board of directors fills the vacancy. If the officer-elect, so if there's a vacancy of an officer-elect for for the board that has not yet been seated, then it's the board-elect that will fill that vacancy of that position. So I know that's happened a couple times where we have to determine, okay, which board, it's the board or the board-elect that makes the decision to fill the position. And so that's an interesting point there. So this is my club. I actually know a little bit about these bylaws. I was involved with helping to write them a couple of years ago when we dusted off the old 1980 typewriter written bylaws and brought them up to the current date here. So, we have a regular meeting 1 month prior to the election of officers. Our club assembly where we conduct elections is actually written in there as the second meeting in December. So the first meeting is always a business meeting. That's kind of where we get everything announced. We'll announce the slate of officers or nominees. There's typically a nominating committee that will come up with the people who are on the ballot. And then after a week, the second meeting is when we have the club assembly, and that's when everybody shows up, makes their votes, and we'll generally fill it with some other club-related activity if the election doesn't take long. It doesn't normally take long because if there's the good process in place, you don't really need a whole lot of discussion. We'll get a little bit more on campaigning here in a minute, but in any case, so it's usually an up and down vote. Now, I'll be honest, slap my hand here. We generally don't do the whole written ballot thing. I know it says so in there that says there will be a ballot placed on a ballot in alphabetical order under each office shall be voted on annual meeting. Our club has always been of a consensus that as long as we only have one nominee for each position, it's not worth making, wasting paper for. So we will present the slate and normally have an up and down vote. So, but there is a vetting process that goes on beforehand. So, we did add something at the bottom, the section 5, and we'll get to that when we talk about a rota here in a little bit. Normal succession of officers is from secretary to treasurer to vice president to president-elect, and then but it's just as normal in there. So there's that standard wiggle room that says if there's a good reason for it, we can do something different. And that's just more of a guidance. So who should be on the nominating committee? And Mary Jo, thanks for joining us. Monday's a busy day. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and see the beginning of it. But so who should be on the nominating committee? Who would you want to put on a nominating committee? Mary Jo, what do you think? You're muted. And I see past presidents summing up a couple times in the chat. So yeah, past presidents are a good point. They have a vested interest in the success of the club. I mean, they've been there, they've done that. They know what it takes. They know what a good candidate would be. They are generally regular members who have been around for a while and know a lot of the newer members and upcoming leaders. And so that would definitely be a good qualification. Committee chairs and engaged members. So is the nominating committee something or somebody that is kind of appointed ad hoc, or is there a process? Does anybody want to share any thoughts about their nominating committees? Dolores?
Yeah, so for our club, it is I think it's the last 5 active past presidents, and then the current president gets to choose, I think, 4 members. So it could be, any good member and any member in good standing for our club. So Baltimore.
And you have a fairly large club too. You over 100 members, or?
No, not anymore. We used to be, but we're about 30, 35ish now.
Oh my! So you have like a third of the club on
Yeah,
the nominating committee there. Oh.
Right. That's right.
Well, yeah, and I did get an example. So I found this from the Rotary Club of Columbia City. And it's very similar to Baltimore. I should have just looked at Baltimore. Past 5 club presidents, with the chairman being the most recent past president. That's kind of a little bit more streamlined. And my club, it's just, it's normally a past president, but it's a past president that the president will identify. And it's normally a fairly recent past president, the immediate past president or one before them. That is somebody who's well connected, has a good idea, and say, hey, you take care of, putting together a nominating committee, nominate a slate of officers, talk to them, make sure they're willing to, and put that person as in charge of doing the political smoky room. We need you to do this job or this job, and getting people lined up so they can be put on that ballot. That's typically the way it works. It's a little bit more streamlined than having a large committee. That seems to work, but anything in between. There's nothing that says you can't have a non-past president on a nominating committee, but it's kind of good practice. Now, we already talked a little bit about having a rotation or a line of succession. And this is what it's called. It's the Rota system. I actually did some research on that. It goes back to the Grand Duchy of Moscow, Kievan Rus succession, and where they were it was at the 1200s. I didn't put a date on here, but it goes way back. Basically it has to do with people just moving up when the leader moves on. And these are my terms here. So I have like a short chain rota, and this is something that's fairly straightforward, and it's kind of the minimum. So you have somebody who's your vice president, your president nominee, or your person in waiting who's identified as your future leader. And it's great to have somebody like that who can shadow your leadership, your president-elect as they're going through the training. Call them a vice president. I know a lot of clubs have vice presidents who will turn into president nominees, which is a good practice as well to get them. And the president-elect, obviously, during that year, president-elect will go through a lot of mandatory training. There's pre-pets, there's Chesapeake pets, there's other mandatory training that's involved. Often there's foundation training to make sure that they're qualified to, apply for grants, et cetera. Then obviously the president, and then the past president still is normally an officer position in the club, has responsibilities, et cetera. And I think that's the minimum. This is what I call a long chain rota. And this is what my club does. And we do a pretty good job at it. And I joke to a lot of people, like when somebody asks you to be the sergeant at arms, they're really asking to be the president in 6 years. And it works out really well, because you're not going to have anybody who's the president who's been a member less than 6 years. And they know everything. And they're, obviously as sergeant at arms, they get to know everybody, they meet everybody, they go around, they collect money from everybody, they know where all the stuff is, the skeletons, not so much the skeleton, but where the stuff is kept. As secretary, they know people even more, they're responsible for attendance, keeping things up to date. As treasurer, they know, who's in good standing usually, and who's needs a little bit more squeezing to take care of their bills. The vice president of my club doesn't really do much. Kind of a year off, but it's kind of a year of waiting as they're kind of watching and getting ready. Our president-elect obviously does all the mandatory training, and they run our lobster festival, which just happened. And then, because of that, we say, once the lobster fest is over, over, it's downhill all the way. It just only gets easier. Then as club president, they have a whole different set of responsibilities, and then as past president. So there's that long chain where people have a chance to learn and get their experience in there. And so when we come up with our ballot, getting back to elections, it's pretty easy to say, okay, we're going to go down the list and make sure everybody's still in line. Every now and then somebody drops out. Right now, we don't have a vice president because the person who was our treasurer last year left the club, and we didn't fill the vacancy. Like I said, the vice president doesn't do a lot, so we have a vacancy there. So the treasurer is going to jump ahead to president-elect, and occasionally this happens. And this is what we're looking at doing for our future years, because we have somebody who just joined the club not too long ago, well, within the year, who's a bookkeeper, and she's an active member, and she knows QuickBooks. And so she is somebody who's expressed an interest in being a treasurer and kind of helping us. Did I mention the last treasurer left the club? Getting our books straight. So in any case, what we're looking at doing is nominating somebody for the position of treasurer who might stay there for a while. And so our secretary is going to jump over to vice president. And this is all my speculation too. Election hasn't happened until second week in December, but that's one of the possibilities for a longer change. This is not a good plan. And, obviously reasons. I mean, you don't want to get a new member. And I've seen this. And I've even heard it not too long ago. Roughly paraphrase, we have somebody who's just joined the club who's interested, or somebody we're looking at joining the club who's interested in being president next year. And so the person's not even a member yet, and they're already looking at that person being their club president in July. And it may be a great person. I know there have been some people who have joined clubs or become Rotarians, and they are fantastic leaders, and they do great. But it, for the most part, it's not good for the club. It's not good for the person because, they run the risk of doing something wrong, setting people off, or just being burned out by something they don't completely understand. So anyway, that's that. We're talking about elections, and we have election day coming up here on November 8th, not Rotary, but the United States or the state, and you see signs all over the place, and you hear robot calls and everything. What does Rotary say about campaigning? Anybody want to chime in on that? Electioneering.
Your slide gives it away, Chris. It's prohibited.
I did put that on. I thought that was going to be a build. Prohibited by international bylaws. And I don't make stuff up here, but so I actually went back and going back to the governance documents. This is from the Rotary International bylaws. A lot of text here. And when I read the Rotary International bylaws, I actually had a tough time really parsing out whether this applied to RI directors, RI president, district governors who are members of Rotary International, because it says, in order that the best qualified Rotarians are selected for RI elective offices, any effort to influence blah, blah, blah. So whether this applies to the club or not, I had a tough time, and I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, maybe if somebody's a lawyer here, they can read into it whether it does or does not. But anecdotally, and doing lots of Google searching, there are lots of districts who do interpret all the campaigns and prohibitions for electioneering to also apply to club positions. So now, the next bunch of slides we're going to go through, I'm going to kind of explain that a little bit more, exactly how that goes in. But first, I want to go to the code of policies here. So this is actually, there's a highlighted thing that I didn't mean to keep highlighted. But this just talks a little bit more about the rules of electioneering and prohibit Rotarians should at all times. And I think if you look at the Rotary Code of Policies, it's a little bit clearer that it does apply to club elections about campaigning and electioneering and really, but how do you get candidates if you can't, say I'm interested? And so the next couple of slides, I kind of went through a whole bunch of anecdotal, and a lot of this is just my research, looking on the internet and trying to figure out what is used or what's not used in a lot of situations. And different people might have different interpretations. So these are some do's and don'ts that I came across. It's okay to say I'm interested. If somebody says I'm interested in being a president, it's basically throwing your hat in the ring or expressing willingness to serve. Some things that are not okay is any actions designed to gain, visibilize, publicize candidates' names, achievements, or so basically saying that, I'm qualified or I'm more qualified to be a club president than so-and-so. that's not necessarily okay with the rules here. Like I said, willingness to serve. It's not okay to attack others. So this isn't your gloves off political campaigning. That is definitely a no-no in Rotary, and it's certainly, I don't think it would follow the four-way test either. Perform normal Rotary duties obviously is okay. Even supporting one candidate over another. Now, I'm not sure if I can't say I've ever recall having a contested Rotary election. I imagine there are some elections where you might have multiple nominees from the floor. I say, I nominate this person, I nominate that person. In which case you may have a contested election, and that kind of validates the whole reason for actually having a vote. But to publicly express your support for one candidate over another, other than making this election, is apparently a no-no. Now, like I said, I mean, there could be room for discussion in there, and I'll go ahead and pause and see if anybody does want to discuss or bring anything up at this point. And I see Michael joined us too. Welcome, Michael, and Lisa's with us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Michael. I Lisa, I have recorded this, so we will be able to share the full session with everybody at the end. So anyway, let me go on. There's one more here. So it is okay. So if there is a challenge or complaint, like person's not qualified to be president, we talked about what the qualifications are, or at least the length of being a club member, or if there's another qualification that's in the bylaws, or that person's violating something. It's okay to point those out. That's legitimate, as long as it's limited to factual information. And then on the not okay, it's not okay to be seeking out votes or trying to say, hey, would you vote for me or do this, et cetera. So that's that. Oh, and then, yeah, it is okay to ask others to refrain from electioneering. So if you do see somebody maybe electioneering in terms of what we talked about, it's okay to tell them not to stop, or remind them that it's not something that's in accordance with Rotary's international bylaws, and it's not okay to seek support from others in an election. So anyway, that is my 37 minutes worth of talking about club elections. And we do have a short panel discussion, and I'm glad we actually have an audience now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Ashley Waters to come up onto the floor with me, and Debbie Harrison. And Debbie's past president of the Rotary Club of Capitol Hill. And I tried to get a smattering of presidents from a small club. So Debbie's with Capitol Hill, a small-ish club. And then Ashley is the president-elect of the Carroll Creek Rotary Club, which is a large club, 190 some odd members. And I am the no longer immediate, but a past president of the Rotary Club of Charles County, which we call a medium-ish club, but we're getting to be a borderline smallish clubs. I think Capitol Hill and Charles County are not too different. We have 38, 37 members. We're down from about 55 a couple of years ago. So anyway, we are now all spotlighted to be on the stage here, and would like to go around the room. And well, let me start first by inviting Ashley to talk a little bit about how the Rotary Club of Carroll Creek runs elections, in particular related to anything we talked about or didn't talk about.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So as Chris mentioned, I am in a very large club. And one of the good things about being in a large club is that we have lots of people to choose from for positions. And so we are very blessed to have a process that starts pretty early. So we are actually right now getting ready to announce our slate. And so we have to announce our slate 30 days prior to voting, in which we have to do at the first meeting in December every year. And so this is a busy time for us. The way we work is that we announce a call for nominations for both our officer positions and 2 at-large board member positions each year. We have 6 board members, but only 2 are up for election each year. And our nominating committee is actually everyone that's in the president line, along with 1 past president. So we currently have our past president, myself as president, my president-elect, and my president nominee are the nominating committee. And so the nominations come to us, and we do our best to finalize a slate and only take 1 slate to our club, mainly to avoid some of the conversations we had before about people feeling like they need to campaign or pitting people against one another. We found that it's best for us to have offline conversations with people just to make sure everyone understands what the nominations mean, give them the timeline. And it's worked out very well that given our size, we also have a lot of club leadership positions that need to be filled that aren't elected, that in most cases we can present a slate that most people feel comfortable with. And anyone who was nominated is able to find a different role to suit their skill sets for this period. So we actually are nominating right now our president nominee designee, which, you know, most clubs don't even know that's a thing. I'm not even really sure it is a thing. We just make it a thing. So for a short period of time, we will actually have 4 people identified: president, president-elect, president nominee, and president nominee designee. And we go through it that way. And so we do all of our votes via voice at the club. And as long as we don't have conflicting slates and any objections to the slate, we can go ahead and do that. So like I said, we call for nominations for about 6 weeks. We work through those nominations. We present them at the beginning of November, and then 30 days later is when we take the vote. So that 30-day period, if anyone does have any questions about the slate we presented, that is when they can actually request any comments, adjustments to the slate, those types of things. Luckily, we've never really had that. We have a pretty good understanding in our club that to be on the board, you have needed to have held some sort of leadership position in the club. And to be in the president line, you need to have served on the board or one of our top tier leadership positions that maybe don't serve on the board. And I think our club, because of all the opportunities, that seems to work out pretty well for us. So that's kind of our process in a nutshell. It's an annual process and is very just like methodical. Again, probably based to, we have some really great bylaws. We're actually updating our bylaws right now, and we're working on making sure that's an almost annual piece because we haven't looked at them for like 5 years.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley. And we'll just hold questions until we've all gotten a chance to talk a little bit about our processes here. Debbie, would you go ahead and talk a little bit about how Capitol Hill runs elections?
Sure. So I'll mention that I think similar to yours, Chris, our club has kind of expanded and contracted over the years. So we've hit, I think, 40, as high as 40, as low as 20, but we're usually somewhere in between there. And I think as a matter of necessity, we do follow the bylaws, and of course the RI rules to the best of our ability, but I think there is by necessity some flexibility built into our nomination process for the board. Structurally, I think we have a president-elect, the same slate of candidates everybody else does. We do try to finish it off, by January, of the preceding year. Just like everybody else, to make sure that everybody has time to attend PETS and all the trainings that are necessary. I do think that, so our votes are actually mostly electronic, especially since the pandemic, but even pre-pandemic, our votes were primarily electronic, simply because we have a lot of folks who travel. DC is a very transient group of people. And so that just made it easier for us to get quorum, and make that happen. And I'm trying to think of, I'm sure Vasilina could probably point out interesting quirks of the Capitol Hill system, but, we have done things a little bit more on the fly in the past, right? Like where suddenly someone has to move and because of a job or because of family, something like that. And we've had to fill positions very quickly, right? And because it's small, I mean, I think the great thing about a large club is you have tons and tons of people to choose from. I think the nice thing about the small club is pretty much everybody's been an officer at some point. And so you can usually find someone who's been treasurer, someone who's been secretary, someone who's been president, right, to fill in when the need arises. So I think that may be something that maybe we do take advantage of that more than a larger club might. Anything I'm missing, Chris?
Not that I think of. We'll open the floor to questions here just after I go ahead and talk a little bit about my club. So I've talked a little bit about it already. So Charles County Rotary is a medium-sized club. We have some processes in place. Typically, nominations are called for in November, so that's coming up, but not tomorrow, not this Wednesday's meeting, but next week's meeting. And so it's only a month. But that said, there still has been a lot of discussion going on among some of the officers about who's going to be a good candidate. Naturally, we have that long chain rota where people will just kind of assume to be in the next position unless there's extenuating circumstances. So that really makes things easy, but we'll finalize things in the next month. And then have the second meeting in December when we actually conduct our elections. Typically a voice vote, even though it should be a ballot, but and that's pretty much the way it works out. I'm not sure what else I'm missing here, but I guess with that, I will go ahead and offer to the floor to see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask any of the panelists. And I hope we do have at least 3 questions here. I'm sure they're out there.
Chris, I have a
Laura?
question I can ask when you're
Please.
ready. You know, I think it would be great to give advice on what to do when you know, for some of these smaller clubs that you just don't have the leaders, you don't have the pool of leaders, what to do. You know, I know in the Rotary Club of Baltimore, we have started to recycle some of our past presidents. And, you know, as much as we really want to try to get as many new leaders to the table to have the opportunity, we just have sometimes just with this pandemic, we fell into a spell where it was, you know, you're trying to bring on new members and it's too soon to push them into something like the club presidency. So maybe a great time to talk about that across the board.
I have some thoughts about that, but I'll defer to Ashley or Debbie to answer first.
I mean, this has certainly happened in Capitol Hill. I mean, I think it's probably happened in all clubs, really. I mean, it's not just Capitol. I hope it's not just Capitol Hill anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think for reasons that are, maybe it's personality, maybe it's age, you know, we do tend to be a pretty mid-career kind of group of people. We have had a really good luck dragooning people, relatively new members, into filling slots on the board when not something like president. You know, we try to make sure it's someone who knows the club well for something like that. But for things like secretary, treasurer, we have discovered that when you bring in a new member to say like a treasurer role, that's sometimes a really good way of getting them engaged and invested. They turn out to be really great Rotarians and committed Rotarians as a result. So maybe it's not a best practice, if you will, but I actually think it's a really good retention tool for making sure someone is invested and involved in the club.
Thank you.
The other thing that I've seen happening recently are 2-year term presidents. I will say, as someone who is almost 4 months in, I can't imagine doing this for another 12 after. But again, we meet weekly. And it's a big club, so it's just a large undertaking. But I know a lot of clubs are looking at the 2-year term because then they're not worried about the leadership changeover, which gives them a little bit more stability, which I could see in the smaller clubs being really beneficial. So I do think it's something for clubs to look at, is maybe not require it, but have it as more of a potential in their bylaws, because it does give you stability in that leadership position, which allows you to then hopefully fill out a few other positions and allow you to kind of grow your membership into those leadership positions, not president. So I was with folks out in 7630 on the Eastern Shore this weekend, and we were talking about that quite a bit with some of their smaller clubs.
Well, and I'll add to that because I can speak from firsthand about being a two-term president. That my situation wasn't that we were even missing a person. We had somebody step out of the lane. Our person next in line was a Rotarian, but he's only been a Rotarian for a couple of years, and didn't want to force him to move up that quickly. And part of it was selfish because I figured, damn, I made a whole bunch of mistakes just planning this. I could do a better job next time around. So I was probably about 3 months into my first year as president when we're coming up to our December elections. And I suggested, I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, but I said, would you mind if I stood for a second term instead of having everybody move up? And I thought, as speaking from firsthand, it was a lot easier the second time around. B, I think everybody appreciated the extra year of seasoning as a club officer and maturing. And, I really enjoyed having those 2 years of going back and kind of fixing the things that I didn't get right as a very new club president and during that time it was the pandemic as well. So it turned out that having a little bit of continuity and stability was a good thing. So kind of threatened to my club too, that if we ever end up not having a president nominee, I'll go throw my hand up again and do it again because it is really one of the most rewarding things that I've found. So, but anyway, let's see. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the floor? So I see Mary Jo, I see Lisa, I see Bethelina, I see Michael. We have a real audience here. You can raise your hand, or you can type in the chat, or you can unmute, speak. Mary Jo?
It is difficult with having our club sort of regenerated, it was very slow. I mean, there was like 6 to 8 people that were really active at all in our club when I joined. And, I got to be that 6-month president, and it was a definite growing time for me to jump in and have to learn all of the things that you have to learn. But what are you going to do? You're going to drop the club? That was sort of and right now we're looking at we don't have a president-elect, and so I think we have one now, but she somewhat is a year Rotarian, and but I think she'll do a good job. So, and I think what happens is the past presidents have to go and support and do some of the background stuff for those new presidents that are just coming aboard.
Let's see. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that's it's good. And I'll tell you, the first time I was a club president was the Rotary Club of Roslyn Fort Myer, and I was a Rotarian for 3 years before then, and I just moved to a Pentagon assignment, and I couldn't go to my own club anymore, so I started showing up as a visiting Rotarian, and they invited me to join. And in almost the same breath that they invited me to join, they said, "Our president-elect just took a job in Syracuse. Would you like to be our president?" And they had 8 members. Everybody had been president before. And it was a time that I could actually do that. So like I said, the district governor-elect has a lot of discretion in who they allow to be president of a club. And that was the greatest experience as well. So, and it was good formative experience. So let's talk about what kind of qualities make a good president. What do you look for? Just in terms of personal qualities. What are some candidates that kind of stand out?
I know for our club, we really look for someone that has demonstrated experience working with a large number of volunteers. Again, because of our size, and I was talking to Chris earlier this evening about CPETS training and having something for large clubs, but everyone in our club has an opinion, and I love their opinions, but trying to mobilize that many volunteers can be really overwhelming, especially if people are used to having an assistant or certain positions at a work job that's a little bit different. And so we always look for someone that has demonstrated experience in that. If not in our club, then somewhere else in the community, just because we know it's a reality for our president. And I joke because one of my members said to me, Ashley, I haven't pegged you as a president yet. And I said, what does that mean? And he goes, well, all of our presidents fall into two camps. He's like, you're either organized or you're inspirational. Very few cross that. And it gave me a good chuckle. Because I'd like to think I'm both, but he said that I'm still out on you. I'm not sure. You're definitely organized, but I'm trying to figure out, like, are you the inspirational president? And but again, for us, like, because we're so big and because we don't have a paid person, we're probably one of the larger clubs that doesn't have a paid secretary or paid administrator like role. We have to be organized. There's a lot of moving parts. So for us, we like to have someone who's been a leader in our club that we know has figured out how to work with the 189 fellow Rotarians that we have as in those roles, because it gives them a good slice of what it's going to be like.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think you hit it right on the head there. Organized, inspirational, basically somebody who can manage tasks well, and somebody who can lead people and has the trust of the club. And yet maybe one or the other, but normally it's a combination of both. That's probably what it takes to be a good board member or club president ultimately. Deputy, anything to add?
I think on the small club side, I think we have the luxury of letting every president kind of use their natural gifts, right? Like we have, DC has a lot of lawyers. So we have really great administrators, people who really love diving into the bylaws and the articles of incorporation and making sure our C3 status is perfect at all times, and making sure licensing is always done perfectly. We have presidents who are really good at that. We have presidents who are really good at maintaining fellowship. And I think that's really critical for a small group, especially if it's an insular group and you want to bring in new people. It's really good to have a personality that can bring people in and make sure that it's an inclusive environment for new folks. And I think, especially if you're trying to make the jump into from small to less small, I think that's a really good trait to have.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to thank Ashley and thank Debbie for joining me on this panel right now. And I'm going to remove your spotlights and go over to the last slide and thank everybody for attending this session. So what you have on the screen here is, if you don't recognize, it's a QR code. And I'll also put a link in the chat here, but that is if you were to take your phone out and were to scan that, it'll take you to the page on the Rotary's website that will take you to the governance documents. And so if anybody wanted to get a copy of the club constitution or the Rotary International bylaws or the recommended bylaws of Rotary Club, they're all out there. Rotary Club policies and procedures. And if you're a lawyer, or if you wish you were one or want to play one on TV, and you want to kind of go through those rules or guidance and see what the requirements are, what Rotary puts out there for you, that is the place to do that. So anyway, with that, I'm going to thank everybody for attending today. I'm going to stop the recording, and